And we are live with episode 3 of Fair Go, the Australian Basic Income Discussion group. That's a bit of a bad start there, but anyhow, today we're going to be discussing the Livable Income Guarantee proposal. Our presenter will be Elise Klein, and we'll get her on shortly. What I like to do before we've got 3 more people in the waiting room. Just going to let them all in. Serious turnout today, which is great. So people are obviously excited about hearing about this proposal. What I like to do is make sure everyone gets a chance to practice how the stuff works. Is I'm going to go around in a little bit and do a little bit of an icebreaker, and because today one of the themes is that we're talking about is contributing to Australian society. So if you would like to say who you are, where you're from, and a contribution that you have or would like to make to Australian society that is outside of the labour market, which isn't just having a job, it's something else, please raise your hand, and then I'll try and get round to the people who've raised their hands. This is a voluntary one. We've got about 20-something people in the discussion now, so no urgency to put your hand up if you're not super keen. But if you can think of a contribution you would like to make to Australian society that is not something that would happen in the labour market or easily happen in the labour market, please raise your hand. Okay, let's go to Stephen. Please unmute your mic and tell us what your contribution would be.
Yeah, so I was thinking it'd be a good idea for sortition, like to have participatory budgeting, all those ideas around, making laws, amending laws, or just having discussions, community discussions, and just being open to it. Maybe you never get called up to do it, but you are, you're in the mix to be called up.
Okay, so we're talking about you could contribute by participating in the policy making process some way. Okay, great. Anybody else want to put their hand up? Okay, Joffrey. Stephen, please put your hand down now or I'll do it for you. Actually, I've done it. Joffrey, go ahead.
Well, we're redesigning mathematical model to modify existing monetary and fiscal models to be able to afford a more efficient, sustainable, and fair universal basic income. So it doesn't mean new taxes, it should actually mean less taxes.
Okay. So you're talking about doing economic modeling and stuff, and what's the reason to do that outside the labour market? Why shouldn't you just get a job at a university or a think tank?
Well, because I've been trying to do that, and they don't. The current mainstream and even heterodox schools can't seem to accept it. That's why.
Okay, because what you're saying is it doesn't necessarily have there's not an immediate institutional vehicle for these ideas, and that you would like to work on.
It doesn't belong to any concrete ideology.
Hand up or what?
Hand up on Zoom. If you go to, I think I don't have a hand raising button. What is it under, guys? If you want to raise your hands, Josh, can you're good at this stuff? Can you tell people how to do it?
It's
Under participants. You go to. Okay. So please put your hand up. Okay, Joffrey, I'll get you to lower your hand. This is a good practice for everyone, so we'll be using it later in the discussion. Jacqueline. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
I've actually got, I'm Jackie Marks. I'm from Ashfield Greens and I'm on Wongal land. I would actually like to do two small, they seem like minor adjustments, but I think that they would have huge impact. The first thing is, sorry about it, it's dinner time for my cats.
No worries.
That's not a baby. 2 things. The first thing is the stigma around not having a job. I would like to hear shock jocks talking about how fabulous it is that you don't have to be out there in the workforce. Now, you said a labour market thing. That is that it not be dependent on the labour market, that you have status in the community. And the other thing is proportional representation in voting. Look at what happened in the ACT. Recently, we can have progressive government if the
what I'm looking for more is what's a personal contribution that you would like to make that's outside
my
the
personal
labour
contribution
market?
would be to probably actually maybe go on radio and say, instead of sitting and just writing letters, that it is okay to not have a job, that we all have a place in the community.
That sounds like a very solid one. John Quiggin.
Hey, yeah, so I mean, I do lots of things which kind of peripheral to the labour market, like my blog and contributing to Wikipedia and stuff like that. So the same kind of stuff.
Wikipedia is an amazing example. I mean, Wikipedia is, I think, the peak achievement of human civilization to date, pretty much. And it's been done entirely outside the labour market, apart from a skeleton stuff. Sorry to interrupt. Please go ahead.
No, I agree. I eventually got burned out of Wikipedia by arguing with people about silly stuff, but I put a lot of effort into it over the years. And the blog is sort of half work and half, those things are, I guess, semi-work, but also just because I want to.
They're definitely outside the labour market. You don't have a job your blog is not something you're getting paid per hour for.
I am not getting paid, but there's no doubt about that, yeah.
Okay. Colin.
Hi. I don't know if you will know me. I'm pretty old now. I'm retired. And I've been in France for years. I've just come back. Before, in the 90s, I ran the Economic Modelling Bureau of Australia, and I ran 14 conferences. I'm planning another conference in February on UBI. And I'm thinking that we've had an enormous amount of discussion on this topic for God knows how long, maybe even 100 years and more. And it's time we actually did something more physical. So I'm proposing to form an organization for the moment called UBI PA. It doesn't matter. And if some other people want to join me, you can look up the website, write to me about it. But the idea is to have a conference in February and to then think quite seriously about forming a political party, which is independent of the other main parties. I'm not sure that they are going to support this.
I think you should definitely form a sidebar at some stage with Peter Zing, who I know is in the meeting, because he's organizing a conference on UBI modeling to take place through Singularity University AU. And I believe there's also a citizens dividend party, because I had the brainwave the other day. Oh, why don't we start a basic income party? And was told that it already exists and it's called the Citizens Dividend Party. But we'll have plenty of turns to come back to that. I'm going to say that if you haven't raised your hand by now, please don't raise it, because we'll want to get on to Elise and the main part of the presentation. I'm just going to go through 5 more people who've got their hands raised. We'll try and move quickly. Kevin Brennan, can you please step up to the microphone and tell us about a contribution you would like to make to Australian society that's outside the labour market? Kevin, you'll have to unmute your microphone.
Mute, sorry, and start video.
As you like, if you'd like to be seen.
Sure.
Hi, Kevin, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm on the Northern Gold Coast. I have 25 years of advocacy work for unemployed people in Australia. I'm now officially retired, but the thing that troubles me most is that we run what I call a monorail polity. We only have a constitution and it's totally basically useless and we can't amend it. So what I want to work on is setting up a dual rail polity. So in other words, instead of trying to change the constitution, we actually establish a second parallel document called a People's Charter. And I'm interested in finding other people who might have an interest in that same area, and that People's Charter would include reference to things like full employment, job guarantee, UBI, or some sort of equivalent thereof.
Okay, great. Well, we'll have. I'm sure you'll have plenty to add to the conversation as we go forward about UBI, basic income, and the basic livable income guarantee and where that fits. So, Rog, I've got a Rog. Is it Rog or Rog?
You got the Rog, yeah.
Yeah.
The spelling, thanks. Yeah, hi, thanks. I'll try and talk quick. Yeah, I'm quite a bit interested in, I guess, non-monetary driven local economic activity. So things like collective sufficiency, like local shared food growing and kind of ecological stuff. Yeah.
Okay, great. And that there's a lot of intersections there with job guarantee ideas and basic income. And we'll hopefully get to hear more about that later on in that context. Michael Haynes. Thanks for being back with us.
Right.
I recognize you from previous meetings.
Yes, it's a great initiative, guys. And what I'm interested in, and I write on Medium and Quora and on the new economic network in Australia and a small blog, looking at the big problem of UBI, which is people have two sides that are for it and against it, but it's all theory. And most of the pilots are all just small pilots that don't actually test a broad community. And so I'm advocating for that we start small, that we include everybody from the start, but just start at $10 per week per person, and then we can see what happens. And if things don't fall apart, if the world doesn't blow up, then over time we can increase it. And so we don't try to solve everything in day one. Maybe we take 10 years so that in 10 years' time, the UBI finally is at the poverty level, say $500 or the then current level of $500 a week. And it takes all the theory away because we can see as, you know, are people stopping work? Are they going on drugs? Are they, you know, misusing their time? You know, what's happening? Is there inflation running rampant? And if at any time the negatives appear, then we can countermeasure them. And we will understand genuinely what it is when you pay everybody a UBI. And so that's what my favourite advocacy is for.
Okay, my work outside the labour market as well is similar, blogging, and I've probably blogged a very similar proposal sometime. Me and you should definitely exchange it. I think this will relate to the conversation about the Livable Income Guarantee in quite an interesting way, because the Livable Income Guarantee is framed, and we'll get Elise to comment on this, as a step towards a basic income, but it starts by having some of the population getting all of a basic income or an entirely livable income, whereas what you're suggesting is everybody gets it, but it's a smaller amount. So you start with a smaller amount and increase it rather than starting with a smaller part of the population and expanding out from there.
Something that is not going to disrupt everything. At $10 per person per week, it's not going to disrupt the economy. It's going to make a real difference to somebody who's got no money. But if you increase it each quarter and take 10 years to get to the poverty line, then through that process, we all learn together in practice rather than in theory.
What will happen, yeah. Now, Colin, you've got your hand up, but I feel like we already came to you. Am I getting confused? Anyhow, Colin, your microphone is muted, but I'm
sorry. No, I've already talked.
Yes, but I'm
you
just going
earlier.
Yeah, I'm going to click lower hand for you, Josh. Now, Josh, do we want to do basic income news now as well? Josh is well. You go ahead, Josh, and include some of the. Josh is the convener of Basic Income Australia, and runs the organisation which set this up and is, you know, paying for the Facebook ads and making it all happen. So I know he's doing at least that outside of the labour market. Josh, go ahead.
So the thing that I would really like to do is start a tool library, and I'd love for it to be free. So there are tool libraries out there that you pay a subscription and you can use the tools as much as you want, but I would like for it to be a library where there's no money being exchanged. So that's my dream contribution.
Fantastic. Now we've got time to come to our star presenter, Elise. Please go ahead, tell us a little bit about a contribution you might like to make outside of the labour market, and then we'll get on to the Livable Income Guarantee in a bit more detail.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me. Well, I feel like I'm making a contribution. I've just become a mum. So, you know, I'm bringing up the next generation of taxpayers to pay for the Livable Income Guarantee. But yeah, I mean, the other thing I'd love to do more of, I used to do it, but I got caught up and stopped it. But I was a wildlife carer for a long time, and I'd get all the little orphaned, lots of possums and birds, and I'd get up every 2 hours, 24 hours a day feeding, you know, these little orphan guys, and then we'd let them go, you know, and yeah, there'd be a whole process towards that. So, you know, just thinking about all the fires and the damage that that's caused, I think, yeah, it's yeah, just a shout out to all those wildlife carers already doing the work. Like
Wires or Nana, these organizations that take care of injured animals. Okay, great. That's a great example of a kind of contribution that people are making outside the labor market. Now, why don't you take your time, give it, 10, 15 minutes or so, and you can talk us through what the Livable Income Guarantee proposal is, and, why you put forward at this time, and all the thinking around it.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, thanks, Austin and Josh for having me, but also to John Quiggin and Jane Goodall, two of my co-authors on this work. They're also on the call. So I think between the three of us, we'll be able to, I think with everybody here, we'll have a really good conversation. But yeah, I'll just give a bit of an overview to the kinds of thinking that we've put into this idea of Livable Income Guarantee, and then, then we can have a good conversation. But first, I want to acknowledge First Nations leaders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge the beautiful yet unceded lands of the Wurundjeri where I live, and currently where I'm in Melbourne lockdown, although that's about to end. And also the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri, where my academic home, the ANU, sits. I acknowledge economic insecurity has been part of the settler colonial dispossession levelled at First Nations people, and I hope this work contributes towards sorting out some of the foundational unfinished business of this country. So we're here to talk about the Livable Income Guarantee. And the first thing I want to say is that it has been a collaborative process between John Quiggin, Jane Goodall, who I acknowledged that are on the call, but also between myself and Tim Dunlop and Troy Henderson. So the five of us have been working on this idea together. And it's emerged from a long ongoing discussion about basic income in Australia. And this conversation was compounded by COVID, which revealed even further the desperate need for something better, as clearly the status quo is not working. So the five of us, we each brought different views to the work, but all of us were driven to develop an idea that could both first be implemented right away, and sorry, in brackets there is if we have political will, and two, to work together and to think with our differing views, standpoints and perspectives, as we believed in doing so would only strengthen what we would produce. So the five of us come from different, backgrounds, disciplinary backgrounds, but we all really wanted to contribute to something that was implementable, and, in our diversity of views, felt that, we created something, interesting and important. The outcome has been from this work has been what we've called the Livable Income Guarantee. So I'm just going to say a few things to introduce the idea, and then my co-authors on the call may want to add some points, and then we're very much keen to get questions and comments, because this idea is very much alive. We're about to start, to do a sort of a more of a worked up next sort of go at the idea. We've already got some really important comments, and so I'm keen to hear views from your expertise on the call. So just to say some things about this idea. So basically the livable income guarantee is an adequate income paid, and we're proposing at the rate of the current age pension. It's an opt-in payment where people are eligible based on that they have not have an adequate market income, that they are undertaking activities that contribute towards society, and people are over the age of 16 years of age. So it is available to migrants, particularly informal migrants, something that people have been sort of cut out of up until this point. Payments are made to individuals, and couples receive a lower amount based on shared living costs. And to mitigate the burden that single parents, who are usually women, have in raising dependents on a single payment, the livable income guarantee should be accompanied by family tax benefits, rental assistance, and other payments. So we definitely don't see it as a standalone payment, that very much there's other payments that need to accompany the livable income guarantee. So there are many activities that we are considering as important social contributions that should be counted as an eligibility criteria for receiving the livable income guarantee. There are many here, and I'm curious to hear your sort of thoughts about this, about what should be included here. But the kinds of ideas that we're sort of thinking about is, of course, care of children, care of elderly, and other care work that's currently unpaid. You know, work that would be considered as volunteering, supporting organisations and causes. It might include firefighting, surf lifesaving, you know, the important work that underpins women's refuges, and other kinds of important work. Work on grant-funded community projects, support for starting small businesses, ecological care projects, the work that people do to look after country and the ecology more broadly, artistic and creative activity, and full-time study. So the point of these contributions is that people are already doing such activities. So our sort of thinking is, and I'll come back to this a little bit, is that the whole idea underpinning the LIG is it's one based on trust, not deficit, which is very much the current sort of status quo. So we do see that people are already doing work, and you know, this whole sort of discourse around people, if you don't have a formal job, you just sit at home watching Netflix. We reject that. People are very productive, and so what we see is that this is not about just creating make work punitive conditionality, that the activities that we're sort of thinking here are already undertaken by most people. Two can be chosen by people themselves. So there is a value to this work for the people that are undertaking it, and that they have a social contribution. So whilst they may not be valued in the market economy, they still have extremely important value in the moral economy and the social reproductive economy. So we're seeing, you know, we're really trying to challenge this idea that you know, work is formal employment. We're really trying to break down that idea particularly, and see that as a really important contribution that the LIG is doing. So really destabilizing this sort of, you know, this idea of wage labour as the only form of work. And as I made in my opening comments, that, you know, I really appreciate that now, particularly having a baby, the amount of care work that goes on. So, I mean, we're not saying that the LIG can ever pay for all of the contributions that people make, but at least it provides people an adequate income and does not attack people in terms of the way that we see in the current welfare system, where, you know, things like Parents Next and Work for the Dole really goes towards attacking the work that people are doing, whereas the LIG does something completely different. We also see the Livable Income Guarantee as a way to integrate or further integrate the tax and welfare systems with respect to how people are participating through their chosen activity. So currently the welfare system starts from the assumption that people are cheats and imposes harsh compliance rules that surveil and manage recipients. By contrast, the tax system operates on the basis of trust and self-assessment. So the taxpayer declares, you know, your tax, and you may be audited, but the whole sort of system is based on trust. So we're trying to, we're flipping that, well, we're changing the welfare component of that to be also based on trust. So our proposal is that the Livable Income Guarantee should operate in a similar way as the tax system, where people can submit their own participation declarations, as some people do with their tax returns. We don't see a role for the job network set up under Howard as he privatised employment services. So instead, we have various payments alongside the Livable Income Guarantee that will help communities, individuals and people to mobilise their own community initiatives. So we are trying to move away from that sort of checks and balances that people are doing work. And so there's an important additional payment around sort of grants, community grants that are available for groups and people and organisations to mobilise to further support the work that they're already doing. So, you know, money for artists to do some creative piece, you know, bands to write music, community support groups to operate even further. I mean, a piece of research that I've been doing is working with women that have been put on Parents Next. So this is the punitive conditional program. That's sort of assuming that mums, and particularly single mums, aren't doing much and need, you know, intervention to get them into the workforce. The research, well, I mean, it doesn't come as much of a surprise. People are, of course, extremely productive. They're looking after their kids, often alone, but also doing lots of work in the community. And one woman that I've been working with, she runs a women's refuge crisis sort of community group. You know, so this stuff is super important, has huge social value and productive value, economic value in supporting people. And so, you know, we see these community grants as being really important in further supporting the work that people are already doing. There are some other payments there too that we've listed, which I think are really quite, I think, are interesting. I mean, there's rental assistance and family tax benefits, which, you know, and disability payments, which of course would need to stay. But the other payment that we've also listed and there is something we've called reparative payments. So this is to First Nations people. It's not a reparation, as it can't be, nothing, what's been taken can never be repaid. And so we're not trying to say that. But it's an idea that's taken from the movement for Black Lives, where so they've got various policy platforms, but in their reparations platform, they have this idea of universal plus basic income. So, you know, they're advocating for a basic income for all of America, but if you're a person of color, then you get a plus. to acknowledge the structural disadvantage. Now, our sort of thinking is sort of along those lines, where you know, whilst everyone has a rightful share to wealth and a right for economic security, it's an acknowledgement that more has been taken from First Nations people, that we are foundationally on stolen land. That was the sort of what was the foundational violence of the country, and so therefore this is an acknowledgement of the role of social policy in that, but also that what has been taken. So it's not to repay. It can never repay, but to acknowledge and to work in the spirit of truth telling in that direction. So that's also there too. So I'm definitely curious on for people's thoughts on that. I might at this point just pass over to John and Jane to see if they wanted to add anything before we open up for questions and comments.
John and Jane, do you want to unmute your microphone? I was actually going to suggest exactly that. And then I'm going to monopolize you guys for a minute before we bring the audience in. But Jane and John, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'd maybe make a brief comment. I really like the question you started with, Austin, because I think that's absolutely on the money. What work do we want to do? And one of the ironies of the present situation is while the government's screaming about shortage of jobs, we're actually not short of work. I mean, that is a fundamental irony. If anything, the coalescent crises of the pandemic, the bushfires, and climate change have produced enormous amounts of work that needs to be done and is not being done. That includes very complex redesign of recycling processes. It involves massive amounts of social support in a lockdown, which was not available to people. And it means the work of recovery when people lose property and livelihood in weather events. You know, there are farmers in regions with hundreds of kilometers of fencing that needs replacing, just as one small example. So we're not short of work, we're short of employment because we're short of the money to pay for work. And this is a way of paying for the work that needs to be done.
So if I might just jump in there before we go to John. So it seems to me you're saying there's three lots of work, just to do it, sort of categorize a little bit. There's sort of three categories of things there that you're describing as work that needs to be done and why it isn't getting done. One might be government programs and government spending that's not occurring, that should be occurring. Another one would be, you know, support for, you know, an activity like refencing a damaged farm, but there aren't the resources to do it. And the third is something that might be happening outside the labor market, outside of a business entirely, but people can't do it because they're too busy trying to make a living and working a job that maybe isn't making as important a contribution. Would that be fair to say that that those three categories all sort of fit in the work not done, so to speak, or the work that needs doing?
Perhaps, but you're already putting it into boxes as to who oversees this. I think I'm trying to flip the switch really in how we think about this, because in an emergency, you don't think who's going to provide this work, who's going to organize it. You rush out there and do it. But you prepare well for an emergency by creating a pre-plan. I mean, that's the bushfire model, and training people. So if you maybe take the bushfire response model as a very good model to use in other areas, we need to train ourselves and each other to respond in all sorts of ways to the crises of many kinds that we're facing. I mean, Elise was talking about wildlife rescue. Now that involves a lot of skills and a lot of organization. So those things work best usually when they're done from the ground up by people who see the situation and respond to it, and then figure out better ways of responding to it in future.
Okay, let's go to John quickly before I've already got a few questions backed up that I'm going to ask before I let everybody else in. But John, did you have something that you wanted to add before we start to sort of pick at it a little bit?
Sure. I suppose an overview that on the one hand, all the design of the policy has been to make something that fits reasonably straightforwardly into the existing welfare system. So it's a household based, whereas a lot of UBI schemes are individual based, and that just reflects the fact that we'd have to reconstruct the entire existing welfare system, things like the old age pension, if you went to an individual basis. And it's basically looking at taking existing systems and extending them. And the scale of it financially isn't huge. There isn't a huge amount of money going in and being taken out as there is in a lot of proposals. On the other hand, it comes up straight again in a radical way, unlike, for example, small universal payments, in the sense that it challenges some key preconceptions that are widely held in the community and particularly in politics. One is the notion that, unlike recipients of the age pension, who simply have to demonstrate the age on their birth certificate and the income qualification, we shouldn't be chivvying other benefit recipients, and we're drawing on a lot of economic research which says things like income management are worse than useless, that the best way to help people is to give them money and let them spend it. And the other thing we're doing is trying to broaden the notion of work beyond market work, and of course that creates, I mean, I think some legitimate concerns, but also I think challenges a kind of labourist view that you see, which in fact not only says that, but typically goes on to say, well, that the only real work is work done by a man wearing a hard hat and a high-vis vest. And if you're
preferably digging coal,
if you're in Queensland, admittedly we have two female leaders, but I've scarcely seen them in civilian clothes for the length of the campaign. So there's a notion of work which, I certainly see it in the rhetoric of people like Albanese, that very much says male manual work is the real work. We'll sort of stretch it beyond that, but certainly we don't want to be getting into stuff like raising children as actual work.
Now, obviously, there's a huge amount that's been raised there, and I'm sure that our participants have more questions about the detail. Now, I like to zoom out and look at things at several levels of abstraction, what Barack Obama would call the view from 40,000 feet, which can be a little bit can sometimes obscure things, but can also sometimes be helpful. So based on what John was saying, not just the last thing you were saying, but the bit before that about this being sort of ready to expand on the existing welfare system, I think that's an interesting place to start, because when Elise was talking, and she was talking about, for example, about parents being supported, I'm like, well, I'm already on a parenting payment. And so for a second, I was thinking, well, what's the difference? And then I think I understand it a little bit, because what she was saying, well, it won't be like Parents Next, which I have an appointment with tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. To hear, what I'm going to be doing in 6 months when my son, gets over the threshold and I'm transferred off that payment. So I think one of the differences you said is it's more like the tax office, where you actually submit, and the assumption is that what you're saying is true, unless they decide to investigate you. So maybe a little bit more, and without getting into the weeds too much, what's the difference between what are the key differences, maybe some sort of bullet points between this and the existing welfare system? Because there's already support to start a small business, there's already support for volunteer activities in certain contexts, there's already support for parenting, and when you talked about art and music, you can get on what's called the NEIS payment, the New Enterprise Initiative Scheme, saying, well, I'm starting a business as an artist, I'm opening a studio, and I'm going to be painting signs and selling for cafes and selling my artwork. But it seems to me that the big difference is at this sort of top conceptual level of how the enforcement, if you will, takes place. So would maybe one of you guys want to expand on that a little bit?
So, I mean, currently, you get your whatever payment you're getting is based on your sort of seen contribution to society. So, you know, it's very conditional around this notion that you contribute in formal employment. Now, even something like Parents Next, you know, you're seen as, you know, you need to get into the labour force. So that's why it's sort of like forcing you into programs to, you know, get work ready, or, you know, I mean, some people think of them as actual parenting programs because that, you know, you have to go to library, some of the activities are library, and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And so the Livable Income Guarantee is taking off all conditions because it's assuming that you're already contributing. So it acts like a basic income in that way. Now, you would need to, you know, in the fact that you're caring for a little person is enough for you to be having.
But hold on a sec. Sorry if I can just interrupt, because it's not really clear to me, because there would be a cutoff age for the child. So when my son's, you know, 17, would I still be getting a parenting payment, or is there a cutoff age? And then how is it different when then the basis of my payment goes away and I have to reapply or make a new statement about how what the new contribution that I'm going to be making is once that person isn't so little anymore?
But you're not only a parent, you're also running this group, you're probably, I don't know, I mean, you're doing all sorts of things. So
I have my interests are wide and varied, I assure you.
I can imagine. So, you know, I mean, there's many ways in which you're already contributing, and so, you know, that's your contribution, and so it's not reliant on being a parent. That's just one example of what someone could say that they're doing.
Okay, so I could then so sorry, John, go ahead.
I mean, jumping in, an important part of it is that all the benefits are reset to the old age pension, which
yes, you get more.
Which is a livable. I mean, you can sort of look at the numbers, and it's on the edge of half of the on the edge of the kind of measure that's said to be okay. So we might want to adjust the pension a bit, but that's a big difference between NewSouth and its various predecessors and the points on which
So the two big differences I'm hearing is the rate is going to be higher, that it's going to definitely be above the poverty level, which is obvious. I mean, I'm not going to, if anyone disagrees with that, you can just jump off the call, because we're not even going to have that conversation. And the second thing would be that the conditionality is less cumbersome, less strict, but it seems to me that there is still some conditionality. So otherwise it would just be a universal basic income that everybody could get. So maybe the next question is, how is this different from a full Andrew Yang style, or some other, one of the other proposals that are out there for just an unconditional, fully universal basic income just paid to everyone?
So, I mean, the conditionality that's most significant that's in the old age pension is income. That if you have an adequate market income, you don't get any of the benefits in the Australian system. And so the number of people you're looking at, funding is massively less, and you don't have the task of paying out. So we're looking at $20,000, $25,000 a year, which is roughly speaking the kind of amount for the pension. Over 20 million adults, that's something like 500 billion, which is essentially all the Commonwealth's budget. And then you have to claw that all back through taxes, hoping that people don't manage to collect the income, collect the benefit, and then hide their income in a way that means they don't pay the tax. So as against a Yang scheme, it's radically different. It's much closer to the existing system.
It's cheaper.
Well, of course, in principle, the notion of the Yang scheme is you get it all back through taxes, so it ends up having the same net cost, the same structure. But to do that, you have to radically restructure the tax system, because the definition of income in the tax system is different from the definition of tax in the welfare system. The welfare system is largely based on households, the tax system based on individuals. So there's a huge amount of change and difficulty in going to a Yang type system compared to something that could be done for $20 to $30 billion a year, which is comparable to what the government's planning to spend on tax cuts.
Okay, so this is where someone like there's an American UBI advocate called Carl Widerquist. He says what really matters with a UBI is the net tax cost, not the gross tax cost. So that because it's much more than with other programs, because a lot of the people who are getting it are the same people who are paying for it. So it's sort of a yes, you're taking with one hand and giving with the other, but the end result is that people's overall tax burden, their net tax burden doesn't change as much as it might sound like when you say we've got to fund 500 billion in taxes, right? So but of course the advantage of the universal system is that you just can't miss out. That if we make a mistake, it's that somebody's getting too much. Whereas if we make a mistake with this system, it's that somebody's getting too little. And I will tell you, having been on the parenting payment since earlier in this year, that 2 or 3 times my wife or I have had our payment stopped because we didn't check the notification on our MyGov inbox that told us we needed to submit a tax return for the business that we'd operated in the previous financial year, and we missed the notification, and we came within an hour or 2 of getting our payment cut off, and having to prove so the conditionality was on us, and that was actually I think something to do with the tax office as well. And so there's always this level of anxiety that the computer's going to say no, and all of a sudden you're not going to be able to pay your rent. So from the point of view of of someone who's had that experience of means testing being an issue, it still creates a fair amount of anxiety for me. The idea that if you earn over a certain amount, you'll get booted off, and then if your income drops away again, you've got to go back. It sounds a bit more like a guaranteed basic income rather than a universal basic income, which is a proposal we might discuss. But I think I want to open up the floor to all the people who've got their hands up. But before I do that, I've got 2 more questions. One would be, isn't this just a job guarantee? Because before I let you answer that, I've heard job guarantee advocates say, oh, during COVID, staying home can be a job. Writing your novel can be a job. Writing your writing TV reviews on your blog, that can be a job. So if you're just watching Netflix, that's no good. But if you're watching Netflix and writing Medium blogs about it, that might be all right. And to which I say, well, what if you're just tweeting? What if you're live tweeting? Where's the line? And it seems to me that the job guarantee advocates a lot of the time want to make that line very permissive. Say many things can be a job. So is this a job guarantee? Is there overlap with the job guarantee idea?
I don't want to speak too much on behalf of the job guarantee people, but I would say a minimum characteristic of a job guarantee is that it pays at least minimum wage, and minimum wage is substantially more than the old age pension. So I would say, to my understanding, I mean obviously people can call things whatever they want. I would say, and we've talked about this, that we should be looking at a full employment policy, which means, in essence, people can get market jobs if they want them. And this would be something separate that says we're not looking at putting in 40 hours a week or 37.5 hours a week. We're looking at something more like 15 hours a week, and the payment isn't the market wage. It's a benefit that's that's conditioned on what we consider to be necessary to have a decent life without a market income, which is basically the old age pension.
Well, I just
want to come back quickly to your previous point. It certainly saves trouble if you give it to everybody, but if you don't get it back from the top 10 or 20% of the population, if the people with smart tax lawyers can collect the benefit and then not pay the tax, you're paying a huge amount.
So the rich guys are always going to win. So we should just roll over and let them get away with it. Is that Is that the position? Sorry,
that's the position. That's the position that Yang and people like that are taking. If I raise this point to say we're going to give the money to rich people, and if we don't get it back, we'll
yeah. Well, Yang in particular goes for a VAT, which is his idea of, because it's as a tax structure.
The GST, which is not exactly a very
progressive tax. No, I don't like that at all. This is what the Carl Widerquist I spoke before, framed it as in terms of income taxes. I would say that we need to question this idea of needing to match spending and taxes. Historically, it's not actually what happens, and whether the deficit hawks are actually right is another question. But we won't start on that. That'll take us off down the MMT that road. I can see Josh getting very panicked that I'm going to go on to one of my monetary theory rants.
Yeah,
last question before I open the floor to everybody else. What if I don't want to contribute? What if I'm an absolute wretch? What if all I want to do is stay home, watch Pornhub, drink Coca-Cola, smoke drugs? What's the plan for me? What do we as a society want to do with that person? Do we want to starve them? Do we want them to be homeless? Do we want them outside of Woolworths begging for change? What's the plan for the people who are not good people? What's the plan for the people who are immoral and who don't have a valuable contribution to make? And if those people don't exist, then why is there any distinction?
Well, I think the distinction's always been a political one, and it's always been about disciplining, the citizenry to do the right thing. So I'm not really sure if I agree with the distinction you're making. Like, I don't think there is an undeserving group of people.
Can I just briefly jump in?
Sure, Jane.
I think there's an interesting challenge in response to that idea that there are some people who don't want to work. Suppose there were an emergency. Suppose a flood came through your town. How many people do you think in that town would be completely unwilling to help in any way? Now, I suspect very, very few. So if you go to the other side of the equation, stop looking at the individual and their work and their income. Look at the situation, the circumstances, and the needs of a situation and the people in it, and people as respondents to that situation. Because we are all going to be in ongoing crisis of one kind or another, and we all need to be respondents. I mean, the biggest one of all is actually the ecological change that's occurring and the need to deal with our waste. We're producing mountains of trash. We need to deal with that, and we're not dealing with it. So there's always work to be done. It's a matter of what work you're asking people to do and in what framework, and that's what we need to be changing. And this would enable the beginnings of that sort of change.
But what I'm doing, I'm responding to the proposal, to the Livable Income Guarantee, because it does have the line in there about people who are willing to contribute to Australian society, that it's paid to people who meet the means testing requirement and who are willing to contribute. Now, I've actually been in an emergency situation. I was living in one of the towns that got hit by the bushfire, and I mean, really, honestly, a lot of us were just busy trying to keep our families safe and get out, right? There wasn't all of it. We didn't all, not all of us rushed to the front line, and and the people in the police and the bushfire brigades and stuff didn't necessarily want us to. So this idea that sometimes the most important thing to do in a crisis or in life in general is just keep out of the way. And that's kind of more what I'm getting at with this idea that if we have people who are willing to make a contribution, that only makes sense if there are people who are not willing to make a contribution. And what this has been framed, I'll open up, I'll let you guys respond, and then we'll definitely open up after this. But the Livable Income Guarantee is framed in your proposal as, as it could be a stepping stone to more ambitious projects like a universal basic income. And to the extent that it's a stepping stone towards UBI, I'm very in favor of it, but the anxiety that comes from it is that what if it's not that we're going up the steps? What if it's not this narrative of progress? What if this is a fork in the road, right? The crisis that we're having now, COVID, is a fork in the road, and down one side we've got a path that you know, or if you want, it's a highway, right? The highway that we're on is everybody's got to work, everybody's got to earn their keep and prove their worth somehow, and there's an exit ramp. And the exit ramp is we stop going down that highway of keeping everybody busy, and we take the exit ramp, which is, no, it's unconditional. The first thing that happens is you get fed. The first thing that happens is you get clothed, and we take care of you. Then we think about what your contribution might be, right? And that's a secondary. And if people aren't contributing, maybe they're depressed, maybe they need mental health services, maybe there's other issues, right? But before any of that, before you earn it, we say that you're worthwhile. And so this is where, you know, right now I feel like, you know, it's a constant war on Twitter, which I've quit partially for this reason, between the job guarantee advocates and the universal basic income advocates. And the job guarantee advocates say that we're neoliberal scumbags who want, you know, capitalist serfdom, and we say that they're, you know, Stalinist people who want to send us all to the work camps to dig ditches, right? And some people say, oh, well, you can just have both, but I feel like there's a real philosophical decision that needs to be made, which is it going to be conditional or is it not? And I'll just let you guys respond to that. Then we'll get to the audience questions.
Can some other people have a say in this sort of thing?
Yes, Eva, we're getting to the audience questions in just a second. Please raise your hand, and I'll get to you as soon as on mute. If you click on Zoom, if you click on participants, there's a hand raise button. So there's a queue of people waiting to ask questions, and I'm going to get to them all. I just had these questions that I'd prepared in advance that I wanted to get through. So Elise, John, Jane, do you want to respond to my concerns on that front?
Sure. Well, first up, the exit ramp you described doesn't exist. I mean, the LIG is a hard enough political sell. I think the idea that you persuade Australian society to pay people with old age pension to sit at home and watch porn, as you say, is so far outside any kind of political discourse we could have that there's no point in raising it.
I don't know that I don't think you've got any data. I don't think you've got any data to base that on. There's polling in the US and Europe that shows a majority support for a basic income. There isn't any polling in Australia. We're going to have Tim Hollow on from the Green Foundation who's doing some polling, and then we'll have a data point to base that on. But I question your assumption.
I will assert that that's the case nonetheless. I mean, but the second point, more generally, I think any system, there are going to be people who cheat the system one way or another. I mean, obviously people at the top who cheat the system. Somehow or other we get by. I mean, we manage, obviously, our existing system with all the conditionality. It doesn't actually have people starving to death. Somehow or other, these people find their way through the cracks. They find their way to live on charity or to live off other people or however they do it. So we do have people dying early because of poverty. We have people dying younger than they would, but people dying of preventable diseases, suicide because of poverty, because of the humiliation of a conditional welfare system. I honestly doubt that many of those, that most of the, in particular the humiliation, I would say, largely reflects people who want to make a contribution and are turned aside at every step. But anyway, we'll leave it at that.
That's a fair enough point, please.
Just one small thing. I mean, like, I definitely have, come to these areas of social policy from the universal basic income side. I mean, I definitely think that, I've really appreciated this work that the five of us have been doing together and thinking through these issues and questions, and I really appreciate the points that you're putting forward. I think one thing that's always I've struggled with as a feminist thinking about a universal basic income is the need to destabilize patriarchal conceptions of wage labour. So it's not just wage labour that's the issue, it's fundamentally patriarchal. And I'm not saying that the Livable Income Guarantee definitely will address, in fact, like completely revolutionise that such an embedded structural system that we're faced with. But I do think in its ability to destabilize the concept of what we understand as work, through really pushing and advocating and supporting people for all the kinds of contributions people make. I do believe that it does something towards the patriarchal wage labour structure or system that we have, and something that the universal basic income, I'm not quite convinced would do. I do think the universal, so that's why I do like to think that the livable income guarantee is a step towards, and not just a sort of a, I don't see it as just a sort of a, you know, just, well, it's practical, so therefore let's just do it, and a universal basic income will never be practical. I actually think it has an important utility in the fight for a universal basic income, coming from a sort of feminist kind of perspective. So I do think it has a really important role to play.
So you think there's a degree of disruption to gender norms in the livable income guarantee that a universal basic income?
Not wholesale, definitely not wholesale, because, you know, of course, like, so just because care work, maybe you could get a livable income for doing care work under the LIG, it doesn't mean then that men are all going to do all the care work and women will go do something. Like, it doesn't mean that those gender norms will get broken down, but it does destabilize the whole concept of wage labour as the form of work, and that's an important feminist fight.
Okay, with that, we will move to audience questions. Thanks very much, guys, for your contributions so far. I'm going to go to Loriana Lucioni first. Loriana, please come join us and put your question to the panel.
Hello, good evening to all. First of all, thank you very much to all the authors present on this call and non-present for putting up this work, which is an important step forward for what I mainly advocate, which is a full unconditional and universal basic income. I do have my divergences, and mainly because it's this conditionality point. However, in the past weeks, you know, I've been thinking over it, and I do understand the more political feasibility frame that has been given to this proposal compared to a universal and unconditional basic income, which might sound too radical and revolutionary. So I do understand it on a political feasibility frame. I also do understand it in terms that what we are talking about here, it's called cultural change. It's a very profound cultural change. So we are working here with foundational values of society, and you know, and this goes back to what was discussed before by Austin, like this fork. So shouldn't we just acknowledge and value human life because having intrinsic value, therefore going fully unconditional, or should we still keep on this continuous redefinition of what do we consider to be a worthwhile contribution to society? So of course I would go straight into unconditionality, because I'm fully on the value, like life as intrinsic value. So yes, we clothe you, we feed you, we provide you with basic needs, and then you might go on and become a full participant of this and contribute back, not because it's imposed on you, but because we trust you and you are an autonomous individual that has been cared for, therefore you will give back, because we are also an altruistic species and we should. So this is the foundational value shift that has to happen. And my fear is that if we remain like on this edge of, well, let's introduce it incrementally, or let's keep some conditionality, because starting from this current system, which is so much embedded in this concept of enforced reciprocity, you know, it might just be unfeasible. So I'm like, I see both sides. And just probably one question, it just came to mind while you were discussing, and some behavioral speculation. So because there is some conditionality and we are saying we are going to value a much broader range of human activities, wouldn't this disincentivize paid work, in the sense that if most of things that we do will be recognized, so someone who is in the formal labor market and is currently not receiving the living income might well say, well, why is this more worthwhile than what I'm doing? So I don't know what I'm getting with this, but I just get it like into my mind that so isn't it better to do it universal and unconditional, and then people will decide what to do? And the second one is it came from some results of the income in Barcelona, where they divided participants into groups and controlled for behavioral effects, whether they were put in conditional or unconditional forms of support in a limited time or extended time. And for the groups that were put within some form of conditionality, which was broadened, like what we're talking about, so even like care for the environment, care for children, and so on, it created a lock-in effect on their behavior, because even though what we meant by contribution was widened, they still had to go and prove that they were doing something. And so that slowed down their recipients, like it kind of put them in that, say, okay, I am a full-time parent, that's it. Because every time, otherwise, if tomorrow I decide to be an artist, I will have to go and reapply. Okay, now today I'm an artist. And so it creates a lock-in effect which slows down social innovation, for example, between other things. And I can go on. Sorry, I don't want to monopolize this, but yeah, thank you. If you could.
Thank you, Loriana, for your contributions. It's always a pleasure. Do any of the authors want to respond? Which of the authors would like to respond to those?
Can I give almost a one-line response?
Please.
I think it would be useful, actually, and I've seen a couple of comments in the chat line on this, to lay down a fundamental principle, which is, and something I would hold to, that it is wrong to use the withdrawal of basic subsistence as a punitive or disciplinary measure in any circumstances.
Yeah, we don't starve prisoners when they've committed heinous
Yeah.
crimes. They still get
Yeah.
they still get 3 hots in a cot.
There is a sense in which, at least this is a statement of my position rather than necessarily the LIG proposal. I would be non-negotiable on that, and I think we should be. But the aim of the policy paper is to really try and wedge an opening so that we can have this widened parameters for participation. I'll stop there.
No, thank you very much, Jane. Do any of the other authors want to respond before we move on to the next question?
Just on the comments about, people who don't contribute, I spent years as a youth worker and working with, people who were always written off as being the non-contributors, the undeserving. And I just really challenge the idea that there are people that don't contribute, that, these people who often get termed that, like I've seen mass contributions people make in supporting, each other to keep, alive, to keep going, to get off certain, to sort their life, like the amount of effective and emotional care that people put in, but also that's serious labor that keeps people on track, people alive, people, in the world and engaged in the world is super important work. And, it's people who are just completely written off. Also, I'm saying that, but there's many examples I can think of people who, doing way more, of course, than just, than the effective work. So what I'm trying to say is I just don't buy that people don't contribute. And, so there is a question about how those contributions are recorded, so that if there was an audit, then they would be able to do that. That's that's an important point. I just don't buy, and I think we really have to challenge this whole point around contribution. I think it's been a lie that's been set up aimed to govern people since Federation around, you need to work to be a deserving person. And I think we really need to
I think you'd find that most people in this group would agree with you, and that what the pushback would be is, well, then why is there talk of conditionality in the document? Why is there talk of the people who make a contribution, which doesn't make sense unless there's people who don't. So if you're still taking feedback for the next version, that's the feedback from us is going to be is going to be that we agree very strongly with this critique of the lifters and leaners approach, which is what our Prime Minister has said.
Austin, I think it's a political one, and what sort of John sort of said. I mean, there is, a voting populace out there that's putting LNP and, the right of Labour. That's still
I will go to the next question soon, but I strongly object to the idea that there's not that you can't win votes with progressive policy, and that you need to sort of compromise with yourself before you get out of bed in the morning and not aim too high, because no one's inspired by someone who doesn't have the conviction of their own values. The Labor Party likes to act like they lost the last election because they weren't pro-coal enough, but actually we had record low turnout, and people can Google this. We had record low turnout, and it was lowest in the areas where there are large numbers of young people. So what that means is that people, you could deduce from the numbers that people who had signed up to vote for the marriage equality plebiscite didn't bother showing up to vote for Labor at the last election because Labor didn't seem to know what their values were. Now, apart from just the issue of, will it be acceptable to, the centre or to Conservatives, there's also the question of, does anybody care enough to champion this idea? Does it inspire people? Does it inspire passion? And I think you'll find if you look at Google Trends, for example, and you look at how many people are Googling basic income, it knocks the teeth out of people Googling something like a job guarantee. Because people see there's a population of people who see
concession. This is not a concession policy. This is what we've put forward. We're not just I think you'll find there's a lot of conviction, particularly around trying to fight about redefining what.
Okay, look, I don't want to litigate this too much. I just say that the language. Sorry, we lost. There's a little bit of lag there. I don't know if it was just at my end. The issue is, let's go to Colin, who's had his hand up for a while, and let him get in there. I was just sort of reacting to the language about contribution in the report itself.
So very quickly, a point of information that France already has something very similar to what you've described, in that artists, actors, musicians can all go to the welfare system and ask for a payment, like a social welfare payment, to keep them working. And it works very well. And it, in fact, leads to much more artistic behavior in society. But on this conditionality thing, I really do feel that Australia is an extremely regulated society. And one of the most lovely things about this idea is that you are not, it's not conditional in the universal side. I want to get away from the idea that Centrelink has control over you. That attitude to welfare is that you are a lower class citizen and we have to look after you. Whereas it should be that you are a very valued citizen, you're all equally valued, and we all pay you equally. And then you arrange the tax system so that people in the higher income levels don't actually make a net gain. That's my way of doing it. Also, I think we really need to get an organization or something which people join and do things in each town around the whole country. Okay, cheers.
Do the authors want to respond to that, or should we move on to the next question? Or
more questions are like.
Okay, Benji.
Oh, Austin, brother, thank you so much. I love you too. First of all, John and Jane, you are as if not far more impressive than the primatologist, and Elise or Dr. Klein, if that is your proper title.
Elise.
Thank you so much for talking as well. First of all, this is my first one of these, and I am much less smart than all you wonderful people. So if I cover ground you guys have already covered months ago, please excuse me. But I sort of came with a pre-prepared question about UBI, a lot of which has been covered with the LIG talk. But I guess, look, as a wannabe brocialist, one of my biggest problems with a universal basic income is the obvious socialist response to it, that it won't close the wealth gap in any way, that it will basically, the rich people will receive the universal basic income, they'll be able to save it or invest it. The middle class will sometimes be able to save it or spend it on their kids, whereas the lower classes will have no choice but to spend it on necessities. And a lot of the things brought up in the Livable Income Guarantee do seem to cover that. I want to mention a point that Elise was talking about, the importance of motherhood. I am the oldest of 7 kids. My mother has had 6 kids herself, the youngest of whom is doing the HSC now, God bless her. And now that he's doing that, in fact, long before he started doing that, she had to go and find work again because she's a single mum. And I want to just make the comment that if my mother had not been there to be my mother right up until this day, and I mean this day, because I'm a recovering heroin addict, if she had not been there to mother me out of jail all the friggin' way, I would not be here to talk to you guys right now. I'd be in a jail cell. So I can absolutely see Elise's point about not just motherhood, but many, many, many other jobs that are not paid right now being necessities. And while I also agree with every single one of Austin's points about conditionality, I also would question any... One of the things that excites me most about universal basic income is that it seems to be something that has support not only on the left, but on the right, and not only on the far left, but from some people on the far right as well, which makes me think that maybe we're closer to accomplishing that than a lot of goals that we may have in our heads. But while that is one of the things that excites me the most about it, it's also one of the things that terrifies me the most about it. Because I am suspicious of any right-winger, far right especially, or elitist who tells us that something is good for us. One of the first things that springs to my mind is that Elon Musk is a big supporter of universal basic income. And I don't doubt that he is, but while whatever you want to think about Elon Musk, I don't think that the first thing he is an altruist. And I would very much doubt if Elon Musk is encouraging a universal basic income for anything other than him thinking that that is a better alternative to what maybe will be a more populist alternative. For example, I think that maybe Elon Musk would, without a doubt, maybe even campaign for a universal basic income. I'm sorry, I'm scapegoating Elon Musk, but I think that maybe many elitists would perhaps campaign for a universal basic income, but back to Elon Musk. In Elon Musk's case, I can imagine him saying, no, listen, I've campaigned for universal basic income, so why should I pay the indigenous people of this South American company for the resources that I'm taking out of the ground to build my Teslas? I mean, come on, everyone's getting enough now, aren't we? My biggest concern is that the gap stays as big as it's always been, and then the elites have another... I don't want to sound like an elite, elitist conspiracy theorist, but my big concern is that these guys are going to say, come on, we fix it now when nothing's been fixed, when the gap is as big as it ever has been. Anyway.
Benji, I would like to add a couple of things quickly before I pass it to our guests to respond. First of all, Benji is a very talented musician who I've... Oh, yeah,
that too. And so that's why I'm all... Yes, pay the musicians, goddammit.
So, but, one of his songs, for example, is highly critical of the police. Well, many of his songs are very highly critical of the police and of the government. And my fear would be that the conditionality applied to this might mean that somebody... working in the public service has to sit and listen through those songs and decide whether or not they're a valid contribution to Australian society, and they probably won't get past the first 4 bars.
And you made half of them. You can.
Yeah, well, that's another story. We talked about my many and varied interests previously. I would quickly like to respond to this idea that, once we have a basic income, the rich people will use it as a shield against further changes. There'd be 2 quick responses I want to make to that before I let other people do so. One is that the more people will have time to get involved in politics and be able to really act. So I think that if that's what they think, then they're probably wrong. Second of all is the question of this idea of the basic income de-conflicting the labor market, so that there's this class conflict that's going on in, you know, workers versus bosses. And if we give everyone a basic income or a livable income guarantee, some other work income outside the labor market, that will be used as an excuse by the bosses to not pay workers more, to not give ownership shares or whatever. I would suggest that actually having money gives you leverage, and you can consider it a kind of, you know, universal strike pay, where more people would be in a position to walk away and say, you know, F you, boss. I don't like the way you're treating me. I don't like the wages here. And I have the option of opting out. And that would give workers much more bargaining power, and that overall the labor share of income would increase in the economy. And that even a livable income guarantee or something like that would have a similar effect. But then I'll hand it over to our featured guests to respond.
Well, certainly that's a point that Troy Henderson and I have made in the past, and obviously it's part of the story. You know, if we say in the report that both working people should have the opportunity to work for market wages and also be able to survive without that. So I think that certainly is a significant part of the motivation for the LIG. But I think when you look at, I think the first thing is that the LIG is unambiguously a pro-poor proposal. There's no way in which, precisely because it's an extension of the existing welfare system, there's no way in which it can be turned around to benefit the rich at the expense of the poor. I wanted to comment a bit, because I just did the numbers, because I hadn't thought about the idea of using a GST to finance a universal basic income. Based on my 500 billion and the fact the GST currently raises 50 billion, you'd want a GST at a rate of 100%. Now, I just seriously don't think that that's a serious proposition. And when you do the numbers on income tax, you similarly get numbers so large that that they're above the rate at which
no one is making that proposal, though, are they? So
there's
no existing proposal for a GST funded basic income of.
Well, I think the Yang's proposal was for VAT funded. VAT is the GST.
Yeah, it was, but I mean, we can look at the numbers of Yang's proposal if we like, but it definitely wasn't a VAT of 100%, and it was a lower amount. And
if so, only because he hasn't done the numbers. I mean,
you can. I mean, I'd encourage you to look at his website and respond to that if you want. But let's not get into funding models.
Well, I mean, let's get into funding models. I mean, I honestly think you can't put up a proposal that can't add up. And
well, look, I don't agree that current year tax receipts have to cover spending.
Okay, I think
I'm a believer. I believe that what you're engaging in is something called the household fallacy, which is the idea that the government
income has seriously to not want to discuss this.
Well, then let's not. Let's move on to the next question, and the next question will be from Michael Haynes, and then we'll get to Rog, who's had his hand up for a long time. Thank you for your patience, Rog.
Okay, fantastic discussion, guys. I've got two questions. What happens when somebody who's getting a livable income decides they want to get into, quotes, traditional paid work? What happens at that time?
So I just wanted to mention that unemployment benefit is a significant, I mean, that's one of the components. So searching for work is one of the activities we list as so that's covered in that sense that.
So they would be getting the livable income, but then as soon as they get a job, they then declare that I've got a job, and they lose the income. So it's effectively like the current unemployment benefit, but at a higher rate. Is that a fair enough?
I think, for people who are looking for work, that's exactly
people who are looking for work, right? And that would go for a mum whose kids are trying to, or she decides that she'll put them into childcare now and get a part-time job. And so would that also tie, that's the second part of my question, would the livable income tie into the income tax system so that when you declare tax during, say, a mother who's gone off and got a part-time job, would that impact the benefit that she's getting for the child, or for doing the childcare, or how would that work?
So I think in general, I think the idea of an integrated tax welfare system is central. I mean, and so all of your income would be assessed, both market and non-market income. That I think is a central part of the story. And in that part, I agree with Austin. It's effective marginal tax rates that matter.
Yeah. Okay. So that clears up my two questions. Thank you very much.
And on that point, I agree with John that it would make much more sense to have it integrated more fully with the tax office rather than having two sets of scales where we're measuring the same things on that cases. Let's go to Rog.
Hi, thanks. I just want to note a couple of Eva Cox maybe wanted to speak before. I just was noting that she doesn't have a digital hand up, just if someone can cover that. Yeah, maybe I hope Elise and Jane can get in more to the discussion as well. But yeah, thanks. Just a thought on the contribution. I think there are people that don't contribute a lot to society. I think a lot of those people are kind of demoralized about their role in society, about not fitting into the labour market, about the labour market being the determinant of value. And I think something like between this and a UBI would open up a space for people who feel marginalised to maybe engage more. Yeah, anyway, that's just a thought. And maybe just a devil's advocate question about the criteria of this in-between system of having certified areas. I guess just to push on the politics, maybe on the pragmatic politics around artists. I have encountered some kind of, I guess, kind of hippie, ferally countercultural artists who feel that they are entitled to make a living out of art. And I think, of course, art is a really important part of society, but whether it should be a guaranteed occupation for all people, I guess that's coming a bit from myself, but I wonder about that politically, whether pragmatically, whether artists, it's a constituency, of course, but whether it, yeah, all right, that's enough. I think you get my gist.
So everyone might have the right to make art, but not necessarily the right to an income from that art. Is that more or less?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Just putting it out there.
Jane or Elise, do you want to respond to that?
Jane's been thinking about this question, I think.
Having taught in an arts faculty for much of my life, I can resonate with what you're saying. Some people you really do want a crown at times. Me, my wonderful art, and I. But I mean, that's another version in a way of the spook of the person who doesn't contribute. I think these questions really have to be dealt with culturally rather than through legislation. And that is the history of the commons movement. And I think, you know, a lot of these arguments about compliance and conditionality, it has to be dealt with. It can't be avoided, but it has to be dealt with culturally. And I think we all need to go back to Eleanor Ostrom, who didn't give us the answers, but she gave us the questions. She gave us the information and the research base for studying how communities themselves manage their resourcing processes. And sometimes they do impose sanctions. You know, in the early days of America, they ran a kind of common system in New England in the townships, and the sanction they used was banishment, which is a pretty brutal deprivation of resources. But I mean, that was an absolutely rare and exceptional imposition after being heard by a court. So it was not any kind of normal process of sanctioning. So again, I think it's getting rid of the furphy, which Elise talked about very effectively, and replacing that with some much more realistic, but I think eternally difficult process of societies just trying to manage their own work and their own systems of fairness. There's no way out of the difficulty of that. It's part of human life. But instead of ignoring it with these ridiculous kind of legalistic kind of political sanctions systems, we need to replace it with a genuine application of human endeavor and intelligence.
I would just quickly like to respond that what I think the difference between what we are, I mean, the people you're talking to are Universal Basic Income Australia. And so our big issue with the Livable Income Guarantee is that it doesn't go far enough against that furphy, that it is haunted by the furphy of the leaner who's not a lifter. And obviously you're going to get, critiqued from both. You're going to get critiqued by other people who have a different point of view. But what we're presenting, and we do so unapologetically, is a different position, and that's the position that we should do away with this idea of the unworthy moocher entirely. And I know that the response my response when reading the proposal and other people in the group was that we feel that you're conceding too much to that to existing cultural norms. And I would also add that we change politics and we change institutions and we change cultural norms in a feedback loop. It's not just that you leave politics to the side while you work on the cultural change. It's the institutions have to change, and that allows for further cultural change. And we're quite aggressive on that. On that note, I'll go to Josh, sorry. Go ahead, Rog. Go ahead, Rog.
Can I hear from Elise still, if she wants to get in?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that just off the back of Jane's points, I think also that we're faced with two major like current crises, which is of course what climate change and biodiversity loss is doing, and how that's going to challenge and how that is challenging how we understand what the economy is. I think the livable, and the other one is inequality, and that's also to say, like we talk about basic income and livable income guarantee very much within sort of the nation state, and we don't sort of reflect on how wealth here is of course stolen from First Nations people, but it's also we're locked into a process of accumulation by dispossession, which is based on the dispossession of people elsewhere who are geographically separate from us, but very much interconnected with wealth and income, wealth that the Australian economy relies on. So, like I in those two, and so to think about those things for a moment. Climate change is forcing us to think about what contribution means. And I do believe that the Livable Income Guarantee, I've sort of said my sort of importance of what I think it brings to breaking down how we understand the patriarchal wage structure. But I also think it's important in terms of rethinking what the economy means in terms of how we prepare ourselves for, climate change and the ecological breakdown that is imminent and already unfolding before our eyes. And the kinds of contributions and the ways in which we understand work is so important in that fight, in terms of a post-development kind of thinking. But also people around the world, the global majority around the world have been sold a lie about development's promise that there will be enough jobs for everybody. The formal economy is the informal economy. And so, again, this need to break down the primacy of wage labour is fundamentally important as a global fight also. And whilst I think the universal basic income has huge importance for those debates also, I still just want to reiterate the point that the work that the Livable Income Guarantee does is really challenge what Jane has already said about this importance of rethinking what contribution means and what work means, and the cultural work that needs to go on for that.
I've just realized we're now 5 minutes over time. I've been completely absorbed in the conversation and loving it. I did want to get to Eva Cox, who had wanted to contribute earlier, but I'm sorry, I had lost.
Can I have 5 minutes? I promise.
Oh well, can we try and keep it to 2 and have 3 minutes for responses from the authors?
A couple of things I do want to raise, and I put it up there. Maybe we need to start looking what I'm calling a universal social dividend, so that we get back to the idea we're sharing the Commonwealth, and it's about things there that gets away from the idea it's just a payment, it's our share of the wealth. We need to get back to the idea that we're not just a set of individuals the way economics makes us, but we are interrelated, and that pushes. But on the broader issue, I've had a lot of experience in this area, and the more we put in the conditionalities and the more we stick with this, the more we stick with basically white men invented in the Industrial Revolution 200 odd years ago, and we've managed to spread it right through the rest of the world. Lots of people manage without the monetary stuff, and I do think we need to try and build something. And I signed up for the alternative thing there, but I'm not too sure that it's not going to end up with so many bits of conditionality that we end up trying to make. I mean, half this bloody discussion has been about the conditionality, and maybe it's worth going for it. And the final point I want to make is, what's very interesting is it's not well supported by women who do not understand it. We have some feminist groups pushing it, but a lot of them very wary of it. And given the fact that the current mess is made because of male versions of economics, can we A, stop talking about just the economy and start talking about society, and B, to start talking about the fact that there's lots more to things than paid work. It's just a sort of short-term invention by white males. And we've got to start putting together what's valued in the society on the basis of what it contributes, not its monetary value. We've got to stop making economic equations, because they'll always turn out looking like penises. Elegantly put as a fine finale, I think.
That's a very strong point to finish on. Do the authors want to respond to that? We'll go to Josh after to help close up and give us a bit more about Basic Income Australia. But do the authors want to respond to what Eva's said?
I agree. Great.
I'd just like to avoid the language of dividend. I mean, it's comes from finance, and the other thing is
shares, maybe.
I think the Alaska Permanent,
yes, somehow,
the Alaska Permanent Fund as a model for dividend, I think, very strongly demonstrates that you can't start with a small payment and build up that. By the top, at some point, as has happened in Alaska, we'll run into fiscal difficulties, and there will be this item which isn't enough to make any. No one's actually living on it, so. Some people are benefiting from it, but it's an easy target for cuts. That's what happened.
Alaska is the most equal state in the United States.
If so, not because of the permanent dividend. That's for sure. So
you're an economist, John. It's hard to sort of get away from the economic language.
Well, I mean, dividends is an economic term, and
I know, but it's also a share of something.
Term, and that's true.
I think I want to get through the idea that this is a sharing; it's not a payment. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. On that note, let's go to Josh for some final thoughts from and some news about Basic Income Australia, and then we'll wrap up. Good time now to say thank you very much to the guests, to Jane, Elise, and John, and to everybody else who's contributed. Thank you so much for your eloquent input to this ongoing discussion. We look forward to hearing from everyone else again. Final word from Josh.
Yeah, so there were a lot of people wanted to say something today, but there were so many of us that we didn't have a chance. So I just want to note that this is a monthly meeting. We are meeting on the last Monday of every month to discuss topics relating to basic income. So this is the discussion group, but then we have an action group. And there have been a few discussions about people wanting to start new groups. I encourage you to join us because we've been meeting for the last 4 years. So we meet on the first Saturday of the month. So that's going to be not this Saturday, but next Saturday at 4 p.m. 4 p.m. AED, what is it? Australian Eastern Daylight Time. Yeah, Melbourne time, where I am. So if you want to come along, I'm just going to pop a link in the chat, just so that you can find it. That's it. That's what I'm going to say.
Okay, great. And on that note, I guess we should give everyone a second to copy that link from the chat, or you can join us on Basic Income Australia on Facebook, or visit Basic Income. What's it? basicincome.rocks or something?
Oh yeah. So we've got two websites: basicincome.rocks and basicincomaustralia.com.
Okay, and Basic Income Australia on Facebook. Thanks, everyone. I know there was a lot of great comments in the chat. We did actually get to everyone who had their hand up, and Eva, who didn't have her hand up. So I think we did a pretty good job.
Can't find the green arrow.
Okay, well, we'll go through that again next time. And look, I think we did as good a job as we could. And thank you for everyone for their comments in the chat. I'm sure they were read by the other participants. And we look forward to continuing this conversation. Please do find us at those addresses. That's Basic Income Australia on Facebook or basicincomeaustralia.com on the web if you're not a fan of Facebook. Thank you everyone for your time, and it's been a real blast.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Very interesting. Appreciate it.